Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for day 3 of our Climate Action Week. My name is Catriona, and I'm very glad to have you with us today. If you're joining us from home, welcome. If you're joining us from school, welcome too. So today, we're going to learn about net zero, but first we're going to get started, just like we have the other 2 days, with a little quiz about how much do you know about climate change. And as I've said before, don't worry if you didn't join us on Monday or Tuesday, if you weren't able to join us, that's okay. And also, don't worry if you get any of these wrong, because we're all learning. We're going to learn a lot today, and some of these questions are going to get this learning started. So let's see what our first question is. Which of these is not happening because of man-made climate change or human-made climate change? Is it volcano erupting? 2 hands up. Right, and you can have a little dance like we've done before. Or is it flooding? Put 1 hand up. Or do you think it's high temperatures? Put your hand on your head. I'll give you a minute to think about it. Volcanoes, flooding, or high temperatures. Which one is not happening because of man-made climate change? And if you like, your teachers can put your answers in the chat and we'll see what everyone thinks. Hopefully you're having a good think about that. What do you think? Do we have... Oh, Strathdown School is having a dance party again with 2 hands up. McIndoe's class, 2 hands up. Lots of people say, Mr. MacArthur's class says the volcano wins. Let's see. Lots of people saying 2 hands up. Let's see what the answer is, shall we? Yay, dance party wins. The volcano is the correct answer because volcanoes erupting are a natural occurrence. It's not something that's made more likely, excuse me, by changing global temperatures. But high temperatures are a result of climate change because an increase in greenhouse gases in our atmosphere means that more heat will stay closer to Earth, right? It's like that blanket covering the Earth, keeping us warmer than we want to be. And flooding is also caused by human-made climate change because more rainfall happens, and then as more water is evaporated due to increased temperatures. So increased temperatures and flooding go hand in hand. So climate change caused by human activity makes both those things much more likely. Let's try another question. How do we produce greenhouse gases? 2 hands up by throwing away food into landfill sites. 1 hand up by farming animals like cows that burp and fart methane. Or hand on your head by burning fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas. Which do you think is a way that humans produce greenhouse gases? Throwing food where it doesn't belong, throwing food waste away where it doesn't belong, farming, or burning fossil fuels? Give you a minute to think about it. Let's see. This question's a bit tricky. Let's see if you get it right. I'm seeing a lot of schools, a lot of classes saying you've got your hands on your head, burning fossil fuels. A couple of different answers in there. Very good. So let's see what the answer is then. Let's find out. Well, the answer is that they're all ways that we produce greenhouse gases. So if you had your hands on your head, you got 1 right, but the other 2 are also ways that we produce greenhouse gases. And these are some of the things we can look at when we're looking to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that we produce. So we can deal with food waste in a way that is where it belongs, like composting. We can look at farming techniques, and we can use less fossil fuels. So well done, all of you that said all of them are correct, but also well done for those of you that said that picked one of them and said they were correct. That was a tricky question. And now, just before I introduce my friend who's going to talk to us today about net zero, can you tell me one thing you learned yesterday? If you joined us yesterday, and don't worry if you didn't, because the recording is on our website and you can go back and look at it. And you don't need to have looked at yesterday's lesson to enjoy today's. But if you were with us yesterday, can you tell me one thing that you learned? I know I learned a great deal yesterday, including that an armadillo can be the size of a pig, which I had no idea. I had always thought of an armadillo as being a small animal, and some of them are. Do you remember Jasper talking about the pink fairy armadillo, I think it was? But yes, I learned that some armadillos are very, very big indeed, and I had no idea. So we have some answers just now. The mining bee lives underground. Yes, the scabious mining bee makes a little nest underground. And Jasper and Emma showed us what they look like, which I had no idea. It looked like an anthill to me. I had no idea that was a bee's home. We learned about different species of bees. We also learned that hoverfly larvae breathe through their bottoms, which was an interesting fact to learn. Yep, and there's lots of different animal facts coming through on the chat. Someone saying Jasper was fantastic. He certainly was. We always enjoy when he comes to visit us. So thank you for sharing what you learned yesterday. That was amazing. And if you haven't already, do go back and look at it because there's some wonderful animal facts, especially about bees, which I thought was fascinating. Yes, and one more. Yes, historically, ancient armadillos were the size of a small car. And if you have a moment, please go and Google that because that was absolutely fascinating. It was amazing. There's an image that we can share on social media that shows you just how big that actually is. But today's lesson is all about net zero. Now, this is something that you'll have heard us mention during the last couple of lessons, how Scotland is moving towards net zero and restored biodiversity. And you may have been asking yourself, what is net zero exactly? What does that mean? Well, wonder no more because here is my colleague and friend Josh, and he will tell us all about what net zero is and how we can get there. Thank you so much, Josh. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Kat. Yeah, my name's Josh. I work with Kat, and I'm going to be talking to you all today about this thing called net zero. So I'm just going to take control of the screen, and I'm going to share my own slides. So I'm going to share here, and hopefully you can see a slide that says net zero.
All good, Josh.
Yes, is that good, Kat?
All good.
Brilliant. Thank you. So I'm going to be talking to you today about this thing called net zero. But before we get into that, I've got a quick question for you. So my question for you is, which of these things absorbs carbon dioxide? So we've got a petrol car, we've got a tree, and then we've got humans. So write your answer in the chat. Which of these three things absorbs or removes carbon dioxide? So I'm seeing a few answers appear in the chat. Brilliant. And everyone so far is saying B or a tree. And you're all correct. Well done. And it is actually, in fact, any type of plant. So it can be a tree, it could be grass, it could be daisies, it could even be seaweed, so plants that live underwater. All of these things can absorb carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. And I just want you to hold that thought in your head because this links to this idea of net zero. So net zero. Our government, Scottish government, has said that they want Scotland to reach net zero by 2045. So that's in 22 years. So think how old you are now, add 22 to that number, and that's how old you will be when hopefully we as a country become net zero. And we're not alone in wanting to do this. So we've actually written this into our laws. So legally, we're going to become net zero by 2045. And there's another 41 countries in the world who've done exactly that. They've also written it into their laws. And then on top of that, there's another 51 countries who've got it in their government policies and their government rules. So there's loads of countries in the world who want to reach this thing called net zero. And I've got some flags of some other countries that are working towards net zero. Does anyone recognize any of these flags? Can anyone put any of the names of those countries in the chat? One of them was where the recent Scout Jamboree happened in the summer that's just been. But does anyone recognize any of those countries? So we've got people recognizing South Korea. Well done. Yeah, so South Korea is on the left, and that's where the Scout Jamboree happened recently. And then we have Poland in the middle. And then a few of you have correctly identified the Maldives. Okay, the Maldives. So the flag on the right is the Maldives. And these are all countries that are working towards net zero and have got it written into their country's laws. And the Maldives is hopefully going to be one of the first countries to reach net zero because they're hoping to become net zero by 2030. So in 7 years' time. And it's important for us to limit the amount of greenhouse gases we are releasing into the atmosphere because that is what is currently driving our current climate change. And before I explain what net zero means, I just need to very quickly cover this thing called the greenhouse effect, which Kat's already touched on a few times really well in the past few sessions. But I'm just going to go over it one more time now. So here's our planet, our lovely planet that we all live on. And surrounding that planet is our atmosphere, where the oxygen we breathe is, and the greenhouse gases are also in our atmosphere. And then we've got our space, and then we've got the sun. And the sun sends light down to our planet, and it warms up our Earth. Just like if you were to have your arm out on a sunny day, the sunlight would hit the arm, and it would cause your arm to feel warm. Some of that heat is then sent back out into space. And as it's leaving, it might come into contact with these things called greenhouse gases. And these greenhouse gases can trap the heat and send it back down to Earth. And that can cause the Earth to get a bit warmer. It's a bit like wearing a jumper, like I'm wearing at the moment, or another layer of clothing. It can trap in the heat, just like Kat was saying earlier on today. Now, we want this to happen. We want some greenhouse gases in our atmosphere to help the Earth stay at a stable temperature. It's a bit like the fairy tale Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You want to have it just right. You don't want it to be too cold. You don't want it to be too hot. You want it to be just right. And this image that you can see at the moment, that's the middle bowl of porridge. That's the just right. This is what we want to be happening. And like Kat was saying yesterday, if we have no greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, all the heat leaves, and then we would be very, very, very cold. But if we have too many greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, then we can trap too much heat and our planet can become too hot. And net zero is a way of avoiding this from happening. So we can think about net zero through the idea of greenhouse gases and then two words. And one of these words is source and one word is sink. And I've got two arrows on the screen now. Sources are going up and sinks are coming down. Now, by looking at that picture, do you think sources release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, or do you think sources remove greenhouse gases from the air, from the atmosphere? So I want you to write either release or remove in the chat. Do you think sources release greenhouse gases, put them into the atmosphere, into the air, or do you think they remove them from the atmosphere? So I'm seeing quite a lot of answers come rushing in. And this is probably a question that you haven't thought about before. I hadn't thought about it before I started this. So we've got a few mixed answers, but most of you are saying release, and well done, you are correct. So sources release greenhouse gases, and they release them into the atmosphere, and sinks, they remove greenhouse gases. They take them out of the atmosphere. So I've got three pictures here. One of them is a source, and two of them are sinks. So which letter is a source? Which letter is releasing greenhouse gases into our atmosphere? Which of those pictures is releasing greenhouse gases into our atmosphere? Brilliant. Well done, everyone. Yeah, the car there, so letter A. It's really useful for us. Lots of us are fortunate enough to own a car, and it helps us get around. But a downside of it with petrol and diesel cars is that they can release CO2 into the atmosphere. And when we're thinking about net zero and sources and sinks, what we're wanting is we're wanting our sources to be the same size as our sinks. So we want our sources to be the same as our sinks. And that means that all of the greenhouse gases that we are releasing, we are then removing, we're absorbing the same amount back. So we're not adding any extra greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. And if we go back about 30 years, so if we go about 30 years into the past, our sources and sinks looked a bit like this. So we've got our sources on the left, and we've got our sinks on the right. And you can see here that we're out of balance. So our sources are much bigger than our sinks. We're putting way more greenhouse gas into the atmosphere than we're removing. But I'm happy to tell you that we are actually moving in the right direction. And you can see from this image that this is kind of where we are now. So our sinks have got a little bit bigger. So we have planted a few more trees in Scotland. So our forests are a bit bigger. But more importantly, our sources on the left are getting smaller. And to be net zero, this is what we need to look like. We need to be balanced. Our sources need to be about the same size as our sinks. And you'll notice the biggest change is how small we've made our sources. So we can plant more trees, we can get bigger forests, we can look after our peatland. Our peatland is really brilliant at storing and holding in carbon. And we can also directly suck CO2, carbon dioxide, out of the air. The most important thing that we can do is trying to make our sources as small as possible. And I've got three examples of things Scotland is already doing to help move the country towards net zero and to help balance out these scales and make our sinks and sources the same size. So the first one is energy. You can see there energy is on the left of the scale, and it's quite small, and we're doing great things to make our energy as small as possible. So the first question I have for you now is this one. So energy is all to do with making electricity, how we make electricity in our country. And in 2021, what percentage of the electricity used in Scotland came from renewable resources? Now, you're probably just going to have a guess at this. I didn't know this until I looked it up last week. But what percentage of the electricity we used, so that's plugging in your TV, that's charging your phone, what percentage of that electricity do you think came from renewable resources? And if you're not sure what a renewable resource is, don't worry. I'm going to show you some of them in a second. We've got a mixture of answers coming in. So we've got lots of people saying B. Two people, as far as I can tell, have said C, and one person has said A. And a big congratulations to the people who said C. So in 2021, 85% of all of the electricity that we used came from renewable resources. And I think that is absolutely incredible. It's not a figure that I thought. I think I would have thought it would have been far too big, but I think it's brilliant that that is the figure that we have. And I've got some pictures of renewable resources on this slide here. Okay, so I've got 4 pictures of renewable resources. Some of them you may recognize, some of them you may not. And what I want you to do now is I just want you to tell me what powers these things. So what causes that wind turbine to move? What causes or what helps those solar panels work? Where are they getting their energy from? The bottom 2 pictures, we've got a dam on the bottom right, a bit like what the beavers built, but this was one that's been built by humans, so it's a bit bigger and a bit more complicated. And then the bottom left is something called geothermal, which you may not have heard of, but it involves drilling down into the Earth's surface. Okay, I've got some lovely answers coming in. So we've got winds. Yeah, the wind turbines, they are powered by wind. The solar panels, they are powered by the sun. The dam, that is hydroelectric. It's quite a fancy word, but basically it means we're using moving water that moves through the dam to make electricity. And then finally, geothermal, that is using water heated from the ground to then use that to make electricity. And these are all types of renewable energy because they are getting their energy from things like wind or sun or moving water or the heated ground, which is renewable. Okay, we can keep using it again and again and again. It's not going to run out. Now, out of these, which which 2 would you say are probably best suited to Scotland? Out of those 4 images, which ones do you think are best suited to Scotland? Which ones do you think Scotland can use really well? There's definitely the top one. There's definitely the one which Scotland is really good for. Yeah, brilliant. I'm seeing everyone coming in with the right answers. So the first one and the main one is wind. So we've got lots of wind turbines. We're one of the windiest places in Europe. So that means we've got a lot of renewable wind power that we can use. And also, as you may know, we are quite wet. And that means that we can have quite a lot of hydroelectric, quite a lot of dams to help us generate electricity. So someone's just said we don't get very much sun, so solar isn't that helpful. And yes, we don't get as much sun as other places, which is why we've got more wind than we have solar. But the exciting thing with solar is that solar is getting more and more efficient, more and more better, which means we need less light to make it work. So we could still see an increase in solar, but wind and water are the main ones that we have. Now, we call these renewable energy, but we can also call them another name. We can call them carbon neutral. So carbon, that's linked to carbon dioxide. And what carbon neutral means is that when they are up and running, so when they're turning in the wind or when the water's flowing through the dam, they don't release any greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And that's really good for net zero because it means we're making energy, but we're not releasing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Now, we do release greenhouse gases when we make them, but like I said, once they're up and running, they are carbon neutral. So I've got a picture, well, 3 pictures here and 3 letters. We've got a wind turbine, we've got a gas power plant, and we've got solar panels. Which of these 3 is not carbon neutral? Which of these 3 energy sources is not carbon neutral? Excellent. Got some very smart cookies in the class today. Brilliant. Well done, everyone. Yeah. So it is letter B. Now, we still make energy by burning gas because it is still useful for us. We're not yet able to be completely powered by renewable resources. But a downside of it does mean that we are releasing CO2 into the atmosphere when we're burning it. So as we move towards becoming net zero, we're going to see more renewable, more carbon neutral energy sources, just like we have at the moment. And those things can produce electricity, and that electricity can then power things like our computers, our phones, and it can also power things like vehicles. And we've got lots of electric buses and electric taxis in Scotland. And as time moves on, more and more people will start to own electric cars. And this isn't just good for reducing the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. It also means that the air in our towns, cities, and villages are going to become cleaner as we burn less petrol and diesel. So that's the first one. Okay, I said I had three to show you. So energy is the first one. The next one we're going to look at is food. Okay, so we've made our energy smaller, and we're also making progress in making the greenhouse gas emissions from our food smaller as well. And this is in part due to the Scottish government working with farmers. So they've all come together, they had a big old meeting, and they produced this document here called Farming for 1.5. And you can see it says from here to 2045. So that links into us trying to become net zero by 2045. And the government's basically working with farmers to see what they can do to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. We heard yesterday about there's an increase in the types of extreme weather like drought and flooding, like Kat was showing this morning. And think about how hard that can make the jobs of farmers if they're having to compete with more flooding and more drought. So they're also wanting to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that is released from farming. Now, this is going to see who was paying attention at the very start of the session. Which greenhouse gas do cows release? Who can remember the name of the greenhouse gas that cows release? We've got a lovely Highland cow here on the screen. Who can remember the name of the gas that it releases? Brilliant. Everyone's coming in. Methane. Yes, so methane is a greenhouse gas. So carbon dioxide is one, methane is another. And sheep and cows release it. But some really hard-working scientists have realized that if you feed seaweed to cows, so if you grow a load of seaweed and then you add it to the winter feed of cows or sheep, then this can actually help them reduce the amount of methane that they release. So as time moves on, we might start to see more of our sheep and cattle be fed seaweed over the winter months to help them reduce the amount of methane that they release. So, spoken about energy, spoken a bit about food. The final one I'm going to talk about is heating. So most people in Scotland, we heat our homes by burning gas in a boiler. So when you're at home, you might see a big white box. It could be in a cupboard or it could be attached to the wall. And that is a boiler, and that will heat the water that goes in your radiators to then heat your home. But there is another way that we can potentially heat our homes, and it's linked to one of the pictures I showed you earlier. So this is a picture I showed you earlier. This is geothermal energy, and this photo is taken in Iceland. And if you remember at the start of the session, Kat showed you a volcanic picture. Iceland is very volcanic, so there's lots of really hot magma very close to the surface. And as a result, Iceland has got lots and lots and lots of geothermal energy. Now, Scotland isn't very volcanic, okay? But that doesn't mean that we can't do some clever engineering to help heat our homes in a similar way. So we're going to leave Iceland now, and we're going to travel all over to Scotland, and we're going to find ourselves in beautiful Glasgow. Okay, so the picture on the left, this is Glasgow now. But if you go back in time, a few hundred years, the picture on the right would have been much more common underneath Glasgow, because that is a mine, and Glasgow had lots of mines in and around it. And that's where people were getting coal or maybe some metals from underground. Now, these mines are now abandoned, and many of them are full of water. And what's happening in Glasgow at the moment is that people are drilling down into these mines, and they are measuring the safety and the temperature of the water. And whilst the water may not be hot enough to turn into steam, like we've got in this picture, it's certainly hot enough to maybe be pumped into our boilers, and then we could use that water to then heat our radiators, which could then heat our homes. So there's some really exciting things that are happening in Glasgow to maybe use geothermal heated water, old mine water, to heat our homes. Okay, it's almost time up for me, but I've got one final activity to leave you with. And I've got this picture of scales to help you. So this is based on the idea of net zero. And remember, I've shown you images of our balance like this, where we're trying to balance our sinks and our sources. Okay, we want them to be the same size. So what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to try and recreate this in class. Doesn't need to be right now, but it can be later on in the day. And there's a document in the resources folder that your teacher can access to help you do this. If you're at home, you can still have a go at this as well. But what I want you to do is I want you to write down sinks and sources. Remember, sources release greenhouse gases and sinks remove greenhouse gases. And if you're in class, your teacher has a document, will be able to access the document to help you with this. And then one of you is going to stand at the front of the class and you're going to be the scales. And you're going to hold your arms out, a bit more stretched out than I can. And you're going to be the scales. And one hand is going to be the sources. And another hand is going to represent the sinks. And then students are going to come up and they're going to put sources in one hand and they're going to put sinks in the other. And I want you to see if you can make your scales balance. And that means that you have reached net zero. Now, it's going to be a bit tricky, but I'm sure you'll be able to give it a go. And that's all from me now. I hope you've enjoyed the session. I've been really impressed with all of the answers that you've given me, and I'm now going to pass back over to my colleague Kat, who's going to take you through the final stages of the session. But well done, everyone. It's been lovely working with you all.
Amazing, Josh. Thanks for that. And really good explanation of what net zero is, and also some really inspiring information on how we can get there as well, because that's always the tricky bit, isn't it? When you learn about something like net zero, you think, well, that sounds really difficult. How do we get there? I think we need to remember, all of us, that it isn't any one person's responsibility to make sure we get to net zero, but we all need to work together. So
That's
we
it,
should feel
exactly.
encouraged by this information and not anxious. It is a big problem, but we can all play our part and we can all work on it together. So just a quick reminder of the things that we want you to do this week, as well as the scale exercise that Josh had for you there. That sounds very cool. But if you are working on your poster, we'd love to see them. Remember, the poster exercise is we're asking you to create a poster in groups or as a class that will be a message to our First Minister of what the future that you hope for looks like. What do you want the future to look like when we reach net zero and restored nature by 2045? Remember that deadline, 22 years from now, where we're hoping to be a net zero country like the other three that Josh showed us there. What do you think that future would look like? What are your hopes? And we'd love to show these to the First Minister, and we'd love to share these in our assembly on Friday as well. And the second thing that you can do this week to take action on climate change is, of course, a litter pick, because every single piece of litter that we can get out of the environment helps wildlife and helps us to have a cleaner and safer environment for everyone. So even if you only pick up a few pieces, I know it's very windy and rainy out this week, but if you want to do a big litter pick, that's wonderful. But even if you only have time to do a tiny one, every piece counts, every little bit helps. So if you can, please go out and do a litter pick and tell us what you find. Tell us where you clean up. Tell us how much you found as well. We always love to hear that kind of information from you. And the third thing that we're looking for this week, if you have time, please do send us a short video message of how your school, your nursery, or your class are taking action on climate change. You could start your video message saying, "I keep Scotland beautiful by," or "We keep Scotland beautiful by," and then tell us what you're doing to take action on climate change. And we'd love to share those as well on our assembly on Friday. And just a quick note, if you're watching this as a recording, later on after Climate Action Week. We would still love to see your posters and your videos and information about any litter picks that you take because Climate Action Week is 1 week during the year, but obviously we're hoping that everyone will take action on climate change year round. So even if you're watching this later on in the year when it's not Climate Action Week and you still want to do these activities, we would still love to hear from you. And if you have any questions at all for Josh or any of our other presenters this week, please email them to us at ecoschools@keepscotlandbeautiful.org. If you have questions about how we're going to reach net zero or any of the concepts that Josh introduced today, you're more than welcome to ask them, and we'll answer as many as we can for our assembly on Friday. Even if you have a question later on in the year, please feel free to ask. It's always all right to ask us questions. And you can say hello to us, and you can share your work this week either at the same email address, or you can find us on most social media platforms at KSB Scotland. You can share your work with us there, or just say a quick hello and tell us what you think of this week's lessons. We'd love to hear from you. I hope you can join us for Friday's assembly, where we'll be sharing examples of all the work that you've been sending in this week. Thank you so much. And we're hoping to have a special guest as well. I hope you can join us then. But that's all we have for today, so bye for now.